Good evening, everyone. My name is Laura Hernandez, and I will be today's facilitator. Thank you for attending our meeting today focused on the Broadway bus priority lanes transit improvements. This is a proposed project that will add full-time bus priority lanes along a 4-mile segment of Broadway from Cesar Chavez Avenue to Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard for the Metro Line 45. And we're here today to hear your feedback. Today is Monday, June 1st, and our meeting is scheduled from 6 to 7 p.m. Buenas tardes a todos, mi nombre es Laura Hernández y seré la facilitadora de la reunión de hoy. Gracias por asistir a nuestra reunión de hoy enfocada en las mejoras de tránsito de los carriles prioritarios para autobuses de Broadway. Este es un proyecto propuesto que añadirá carriles exclusivos para los autobuses las 24 horas del día a lo largo de un tramo de 4 millas de Broadway, desde la avenida Cesar Chavez hasta Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, para la línea 45 de Metro. Y estamos aquí hoy para escuchar sus comentarios sobre este proyecto. Hoy es el lunes 1 de junio y nuestra reunión está programada de 6 a 7 p.m. All right, so before we begin, I'd like to note that interpretation services are available in Spanish today. To access interpretation, please click the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and select your preferred language. If you're joining the Zoom smartphone app, you can click More or the 3 dots in the bottom right corner of your screen and then select Language Interpretation and choose your language. Antes de comenzar, me gustaría informarles que contamos con servicios de interpretación al español. Para acceder a la interpretación, haga clic en el botón Interpretation, Interpretación, ubicada en la parte inferior de su pantalla de Zoom y seleccione su idioma de preferencia. Si está conectado desde la aplicación móvil de Zoom, haga clic en More o Más o en los 3 puntos ubicados en la esquina inferior derecha de su pantalla. Luego seleccione Language Interpretation o Interpretación de idiomas y elija su idioma. Thank you to our interpreter, Diana Orozco. We appreciate your support in making today's meeting accessible to our Spanish-speaking community. All right, so today's meeting is being recorded. Audience mics and cameras will remain off. We will have a Q&A following the presentation. So if you're interested in participating, feel free to drop your questions by using the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. During the Q&A segment, we will read the submitted questions out loud and have the project team answer live. Throughout the meeting, we will be dropping helpful information in the chat, such as interpretation instructions and how to stay connected with us and other helpful tools that will help you stay engaged throughout today's meeting. All right. Next slide. During today's meeting, we will be sharing a few Metro updates, including updates on how paying to ride Metro just got easier. We'll talk about the next-gen priority lanes, Broadway bus corridor projects, the Broadway bus priority lanes projects, reconnecting communities and neighborhood bus stop improvements. We'll go over next steps for these projects, and we'll be closing it out with our Q&A segment. Okay, I also wanted to take the opportunity to recognize and welcome our elected officials and other city representatives who are joining us today. At this time, I want to acknowledge Mary Alice Williams from the city of LA. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. Before we get started with the agenda, I do want to introduce our project team members that will be here with us today. I'll pass it over to Tito to get started.
Yes, hi, thank you. Thank you, Laura, and thank you all for joining us. I'm Tito Coronas here, Manager of Community Relations from Bus Speed and Reliability Initiatives. Thank you again for joining us to discuss the proposed Broadway improvements. Again, this is a proposal. This is the first step in the discussions. I want to make sure that everybody understands this is the first. This is not the last. The decision has not been made as to the alignment or how exactly it would be delivered. So this is the opportunity to get to be involved at the beginning. So thank you all for joining us, and acknowledge that we have been seeing many of your recommendations and have been receiving your input. So thank you again for this.
Thank you, Tito. We have James Shahamiri.
Good evening, everyone. James Shahamiri, Senior Director at LA Metro. I oversee Metro's Speed and Reliability Program. Nolan?
Hey, Nolan Borgman. I work in Metro Program Management as a senior director. I'm working on some improvements to bus shelters along the Broadway corridor.
Thank you, Nolan. And finally, Lamise Chang.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Lamise Chang. I am the project manager for the South Broadway Safety and Mobility Project at the LADOT, the Los Angeles Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Lamise. And I will now pass it to Tita to share some exciting news.
Thank you, Laura. So actually, this is a great news just in time for World Cup, as we're going to have many more transit riders entering into the system and visiting us in LA and throughout. Metro rideshare, actually, I'm sorry, Metro riding is about to get easier. It started now. Regular fare riders can now tap their credit card or debit card, Apple or Google Pay to ride Metro. So before you would just need to use a tap card or pay with money. Now actually you can tap your credit card just as you would tap a general tap card. Riders will still get 2 free hours of transfers, but you must use the same exact card that you initiated payment with, so it remembers it in the system. When doing this, also tap cards remain available and should still be used by reduced fare and Go Pass riders. So if you have either a Go Pass through your school, or you have reduced fare that you've applied through Metro, you still have to use the tap card. But we're working on improving the system by adding that to the credit debit payment, and that should be expected next year. So so right now, keep a hold of your tap cards, but starting next year, you'll also be able to transfer your reduced fare and Go Pass onto your credit cards. Now we're going to go to the next slide to see this video. All right, thank you for that. If we go on to the next slide, this is the introduction. There's multiple projects here. I know Laura mentioned the first part of it, which is on the Metro LADOT component where we work together to deliver these lanes, but also LADOT is extending or proposing to extend the lanes also from MLK to Manchester. So we have both projects that we're going to be talking about today because it involves Broadway. Again, I want to reiterate, this is a proposed project. We're here to take input. and use that to determine how we will design the projects. We're getting a lot of great feedback as to how to deliver the project. That's what actually we're here to do, is to hear your feedback. We're doing presentations through many groups through the month of June and July. So if we've not been able to coordinate with your group and you represent the area, please make sure to reach out to us so we can ensure that we are able to meet with you and also present the information, but also take feedback from you. I wanted to share that we take this seriously because many of the projects that we deliver are done through input from community. In some cases, like a BRT that we just recently broke ground on, the community of a particular area got together and created their own design for a project and how to best deliver the project. And many of those elements were actually used in the design of the project. So I want to share with community that, again, we do listen to you. We are here to hear you out. I want to make sure that you are a part of this process from the beginning, which is why we're here today. Again, this is the beginning. This is not the end. We're not here to tell you that this is it and we're not changing it. We're actually here to take a lot of great input and work with the community as to how to best deliver this project. So with that, I want to hand it over to James Shahamiri to go over the next couple slides, talk about the proposed bus speed project and also how bus lanes work better. Thank you.
Thanks, Tito. So the program that we have is centered around quick build bus lanes. We're really trying to get improvements out onto the street as quickly as possible to bring the speed and reliability benefits that our customers rely upon. This video is of our Flower Street bus lanes. It was installed back in 2019 in downtown LA. And it just kind of illustrates how we can move more people more efficiently when we have buses in their own bus lane. We're typically targeting up to a 15% improvement in travel time and reliability. And I think it's important to talk about the reliability component as well. It's not just about moving the bus faster. It's really about having the bus show up when the schedule says it'll be there, so people can rely on it consistently for their transportation. Next slide. So how does a bus lane work? We have a lot of bus lanes that we've recently installed throughout Los Angeles. We have a lot in downtown on 5th, 6th, the Grand Olive, and Flower and Figueroa, to name a few. We've also recently installed bus lanes on La Brea, Venice, Roscoe Boulevard up in the Valley, and also our most recent project, Florence in South LA. And these bus lanes are all very similar. They're just done with paint and signs. There are no physical barriers on these bus lanes. And importantly, drivers can enter these bus lanes to make right turns at intersections and at driveways. So you can also think of these bus lanes as essentially a block-long right turn pocket. So when we're talking about reconfiguring these lanes, having that bus lane be available for right turns is important as it keeps those through lanes flowing. I'll also add that these proposed bus lanes are shared bus-bike lanes. So the bus lanes that we're discussing for the Broadway corridor tonight, they would be for buses, people on bicycles, and for drivers making right turns. Next slide. And next slide. So just kind of going over all the different agencies that are involved in these projects. As Tito mentioned, we have multiple projects on the Broadway corridor. Metro has our bus lane project from Cesar Chavez down to Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. LADOT also has a project that continues south on Broadway from Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. And Metro also has some bus stop improvements, which we'll talk about. But just in terms of the agencies, Metro oversees the regional transportation and mobility projects. Los Angeles Department of Transportation, they really manage the streets themselves, all the lane striping, the traffic signals, traffic operations, parking, etc. Streets LA, they're the ones who maintain the streets and sidewalks and related infrastructure. LA SAN for cleanliness, waste management, and environmental health. And then my LA 311, really one-stop shop to report issues that the city can address. Next slide. Okay, so just kind of going back to the different project teams on tonight. The main purpose of tonight's discussion really is the Metro-led portion of the proposed bus lane project on Broadway from Cesar Chavez down to Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. That said, we also have LADOT here who can speak to their safety and mobility project on Broadway south of Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. And then we also have the Metro Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods team who will be delivering several bus stop improvements throughout the corridor. improved transit signal priority, and other bus stop related amenities. Next slide. So this is a map of what we just talked about. The green line are the proposed bus lanes, again, with a split at Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. North of that is the focus of tonight's presentation. That's the Metro-led proposed bus lane project. South of Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard is the LADOT proposed bus lane project. And then we have the bus stop improvements sprinkled throughout this entire corridor. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to get into the details of the proposed bus lane project on Broadway from Cesar Chavez all the way down to Manchester. But again, the Metro-led portion goes down to MLK. I think the important takeaway here is that particularly in the downtown segment of Broadway, we have multiple lines. We have over 58,000 daily weekday boardings on all the lines that run along the Broadway corridor, particularly in the downtown segment. We have bus frequencies as low as every 2 minutes per direction in the peak hour. So very intense transit use. We're moving a lot of people along this corridor. And that's why we're talking about bus lanes tonight. We're really looking at low cost, high impact ways of delivering these types of speed and reliability benefits quickly to benefit these riders and to make sure that people can plan around using Metro Transit. So in terms of the overall extent of the bus lanes, 8 miles is proposed from Cesar Chavez down to Manchester. That's the combination of the Metro and LADOT projects. The proposal is for full-time bus lanes in each direction. There will be potential parking removals to accommodate new left turn lanes. In other locations, there will be some left turn restrictions to accommodate the bus lanes and other operational issues along the corridor. The Broadway corridor today has transit signal priority, which is a technology that allows traffic signals to respond to an approaching bus, to hold a green light longer to let that bus through, or if that bus is stopped at a red light, to shorten that red light. And as part of the RCN project, we're doing a pretty substantial upgrade of the transit signal priority along the Broadway corridor. We're improving the communication system that runs on the back end to really make sure that system is operating at peak efficiency and reliability. And then again, the RCN project team is also upgrading 20 sites with bus stop improvements. Next slide. So we're going to go through the cross sections and kind of the initial draft of the proposed cross sections for the Metro portion of the Broadway corridor. Again, this is the portion from Cesar Chavez down to Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. And there's 3 different sets of cross sections along this stretch. And so we're going to start at the south segment. So in the south downtown area, from Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard up to 11th Street. That top graphic, that's the existing cross section of the street. So generally in this area, you have parking on both sides of the street and 2 traffic lanes in each direction. At major intersections, typically parking is restricted to allow for a left turn lane in the middle of the street to facilitate those left turn movements. And as part of the current proposal, it's to convert the rightmost traffic lanes to full-time bus lanes. This would keep parking along the street, just converting those outside traffic lanes to full-time shared bus bike lanes. Again, drivers can use those lanes to make right turns. And all existing left turn pockets would remain in place. There are a number of locations where left turns are allowed today, but there are no left turn pockets. And so we are working with LADOT to determine how to treat those intersections. These are typically more minor intersections with lower left turn volumes. The issue that we're trying to work through is when there's only one lane in each direction for general traffic. If somebody is trying to make a left turn from that lane, they're often waiting for gaps in opposing traffic, and that would potentially block that entire direction of traffic. And so we're looking at ways of either adding new left turn pockets where they don't exist, which would mean removing some parking, or potentially restricting some of those left turns. So we have not figured out the details of that yet, but there will be some trade-offs between circulation and parking in this segment. Next slide. So this moves us up into the middle segment. I think this is the most interesting portion of the Broadway corridor. This area from 11th to 2nd certainly has the most intensity of use. It has the most people out on the street walking. It has heavy transit ridership. People are riding bicycles. There's a lot of businesses along this segment of Broadway who all use and interact with the street in meaningful ways. And so the top cross section is the existing, so this is generally looking north. And as part of the 2014 Broadway dress rehearsal, the street was reconfigured to add in these pedestrianized areas, typically along the west side of the street. These are the very large painted areas in front of Grand Central Market, for example, which have outdoor tables and chairs. So just a lot of extra elbow room for folks in this busy area. When this change was made back in 2014, one of the southbound lanes on Broadway was removed. And as part of this change, Metro service was heavily impacted in the southbound direction. So we actually shifted our southbound service a block over to the east onto Spring Street. And so our current circulation for Metro operations in this segment of Broadway is in the northbound direction, buses are on Broadway all the way through. But in the southbound direction, buses jog over at Cesar Chavez, and then they head south on Spring, and then they rejoin Broadway at 11th. And so that was kind of the fix that we put in place about 12 years ago as a result of that lane reconfiguration. And so one of the ideas that we've had is actually to bring southbound service back onto Broadway. And the proposal is to restore Broadway to a 4-lane cross section, put it back to essentially the way it was pre-dress rehearsal in terms of number of traffic lanes. And we've heard a lot of feedback on this. We've heard concerns around the reduction in width of the painted sidewalk areas, removal of potential sidewalk tables and chairs. So these are all things that we're hearing as we go through this process, and that's why we're here tonight. We do want to hear from you on these trade-offs. Really, the trade-off is reduction of those painted sidewalk areas to accommodate the southbound bus lane, to accommodate the faster travel times. One of the issues Metro does face with the jog over to Spring Street today is that it does add considerable runtime to the line because we have to make these turning movements on and off Broadway. So it's not just the bus lane on Broadway, but it's also the removal of kind of coming off the route and then rejoining. But as part of this proposal, some of these painted areas would remain on the west side of the street. That's shown in the bottom cross section where we still have 6 to 8 feet available. There are opportunities to relocate or add new loading zones. When we've been out walking the area, talking to businesses, we have heard concerns over passenger loading, over commercial loading. And so, while we do understand that there is significant concern in the community over reconfiguration of the painted sidewalk areas, we do want to say that there are other opportunities to reconfigure the street space to try to address some of these loading issues and other traffic operations issues. And then the last thing I'll add on this segment, as we discussed in the previous cross section, when we just have one lane in each direction, left turns do become problematic. And so we would be looking to restrict all of the existing northbound left turns in this segment as part of this proposal. Next slide. And then this will cover the last cross section. This is the northernmost cross section. This is from 2nd up to Cesar Chavez. This is a wider portion of Broadway, so we have fewer constraints. In this segment, parking and left turns would not be changed in any way. This would just be converting the rightmost traffic lanes to full-time shared bus bike lanes. Next slide. And now we're going to discuss the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods bus stop improvements. This was a federal grant that Metro received to make bus stop improvements and other types of transit supportive improvements ahead of the Olympics. Next slide. So we are proposing 20 bus stop improvements. So these are improvements such as new bus shelters, sidewalk repairs where the sidewalk has been damaged, new accessible curb ramps at corners to get people with disabilities on and off the sidewalk and into the crosswalks, pedestrian lighting, street trees in vacant tree wells, and additional wayfinding. And this is a full list on the right of the bus stops that would be improved with the RCN project. And as I stated earlier, the RCN project is also doing that fairly significant transit signal priority upgrade along the corridor. Next slide. And so now we'll just briefly discuss LADOT's South Broadway Safety and Mobility Project. Next slide. So this is the project on Broadway from Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard down to Manchester. And this project has had its own separate outreach process. We have the project manager here with us tonight to answer any questions. And this project is also proposing to reconfigure Broadway with shared bus bike lanes. So the top is the existing cross section, parking on both sides, 2 lanes of traffic in each direction, and left turn lanes. And the proposal is to convert those outside-most, rightmost travel lanes to full-time shared bus bike lanes. So this is a very similar cross section to what we discussed just north of Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard as part of the Metro-led effort. Next slide. And I'm going to hand it over to Tito. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, James. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll share where we are with the schedule. As you can see, we're at the beginning here, where we're doing presentations, briefings, community meetings. We're sharing all this with community now. We want to hear your thoughts on what the proposed is. This is the meaning that what we shared earlier is the final project. This is actually where we are starting, what the starting point is, but we're going to take input from community, listen to you and see how we can best design this project to be delivered in and provide you with as much of the transit improvements that we can do with this project, but also do it with community input and stakeholder involvement. So we thank you for being here tonight. We have a great amount of folks that have joined us, and we've also been hearing from you throughout the last couple of days. So thank you for participating and sharing your thoughts. So we are here again, 2026. We're doing summer, we're doing stakeholder briefings and presentations. And this is a concurrent schedule, not just for bus speed, but also for the bus corridor improvements. Additionally, they're doing stakeholder briefings and presentations through this year. Next year, late winter, spring of next year, we would be doing construction start and outreach notification should the design information be updated and reflect how the project would be. Again, we would come back and share with community what the proposed construction and design would be. And then once that is share with community, then we would move forward and share what the proposed delivery schedule would be with anticipation of operations to happen sometime later next year. Should everything move according to the plan. Again, this is always up for discussion as to how we can best deliver the project. But as you also see in the bottom of this screen, 2027, the bus corridor improvements will continue with outreach and notification on specific project and construction schedule throughout the year of 2027 to have it wrap up the design and also start implementing it through the corridor in time for the winter spring construction float for the 2028 Summer Olympics. So again, right now we are in line with each other on 2026, and then as we reach 2027, the projects both continue to develop with potential delivery of the bus lanes in the northern segment with Metro to happen sometime in later 2027. With the delivery of the bus improvements to happen through 27 and 28 of next year and the year after. So that's pretty much the proposed delivery schedule for this project. But again, we are here to listen to what you're having to say. We also have another opportunity. If we go on to the next slide, if you would like to participate in person, LADOT is having a community meeting in person at South Broadway Safety and Mobility Project on Thursday, June 11th at 6 p.m. and it's at Iglesia Quinonia. And that is at 5606 South Broadway in Los Angeles. Again, you can RSVP with the link below. Again, this is being held in person by LADOT on Thursday, June 11th, and it's in person at 6 p.m. at Iglesia Koinonia, 6 p.m. again, 5606 South Broadway, where we'll have information for all the projects at this event as well. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Laura as we're going to get started with the Q&A. Actually, let's go one more and give you information on how to stay connected. This is a project phone number and web page, as well as email that we have here, broadway@metro.net, metro.net/Broadway, and the phone number for the project, 213-922-4869. If you have any questions or you'd like to email us, please do so. Going on to the next slide. Now we're going to Q&A, so I'll bring it back to Laura, if you will want to join me for these questions.
Thank you, Tito. All right, we will now get started with the Q&A segment. If you are interested in participating, you can go to the next slide. We have some instructions there. You can participate by submitting your question or comment through the Q&A function, which I've seen a few of you already start plugging them in. So thanks for participating. And that Q&A function, you can find it at the bottom of your screen. If you look at the screen right now, you have an outline of where you can click on. That's the icon you'll have to click on to participate. Please note we will try to address your questions and comments by topic, and some may be grouped to facilitate the discussion.
And Laura, I did want to correct something. There was a typo on our email. It is broadway@metro.net. There was an extra letter at the end of Broadway. So just again, if you would like to email us, you can email us at just broadway@metro.net. The extra letter was an L. Please remove that to share with everybody. Also wanted to acknowledge that notable person in the audience from Council District 14, City of LA, Isabel Jurado's office. Kevin Ubillo's in the office. So Kevin, thank you for joining us again. We've been chatting with you, and also understand that the community is very interested in this project, as well as is the council member. So thank you for joining us and being part of the meeting tonight. All right, back to you, Laura.
Thank you, Tito. All right, so first question we see are directed. We have a bit about adjustments to the corridor approach. First question, could we add bus priority to Hill Street instead of Broadway?
Yeah, so I can answer that. I've been kind of looking at some of the questions that have been coming through, just in terms of how this project came to be and what Metro is trying to achieve. We're really looking at existing lines and alignments. We're not creating like a new bus line, for instance, or a BRT, a bus rapid transit service. This is the goal here is how do we, through infrastructure improvements, improve the speed and reliability of our bus service. So we're looking at our highest frequency corridors. Broadway is one of our highest frequency corridors. We have buses every 5 minutes during the peak, and then it's typically every 10 minutes throughout the rest of the day, just for line 45. But we do have multiple lines on Broadway, so the frequencies in some areas are as short as every 2 minutes per direction. So we're really trying to through infrastructure be able to maintain that very frequent schedule, and ideally be able to really like push the envelope on the speed reliability. So in terms of corridor selection, that's kind of how we're looking at things, where we just look at where the existing service is, where our highest frequency service is, where our ridership is. And so, as I was saying earlier, the southbound service is on Spring Street today. It's on Spring down to 9th, where Spring joins with Main, and then that service continues south on Main, and then jogs back over to Broadway at 11th. So in terms of looking at other corridors, we're not looking at other corridors. We're looking at the corridors that the service is on today, which is mainly Broadway, with that southbound service on Spring. So, I think that's really the focus of what we're looking at, is how do we make infrastructure improvements that can improve the operating times and the reliability of the bus on their existing alignments.
Thank you, James. On a similar topic, there is a question about consideration of adjusting the route to avoid Broadway between 1st and 12th Street.
Yeah, so again, we're not looking at making major line changes. We're really looking at the existing service. One of the challenges in downtown is the intensity of use. We have there are so many people within a very condensed area. That's why we have lines on multiple streets. Almost every street in downtown has a bus line on it. And that's just because we're moving either Metro or other municipal operators. We're just moving so many people on transit through downtown that we do kind of need to spread things out amongst multiple streets just to maintain service, to prevent overcrowding at bus stops, et cetera. So that's another reason why we're not looking at necessarily rejiggering where lines are. We're really looking at where are the lines today and how do we make improvements on those streets.
Thank you, James. Another question is regarding preserving, pedestrian-friendly spaces on Broadway, particularly the planter areas. And how is the project team looking to preserve those spaces?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the major trade-off. I mean, that's why we're here tonight discussing this. The trade-off is between having that southbound bus lane on Broadway and bringing that southbound service back onto Broadway from Spring Street. And the trade-off is narrowing of the larger painted sidewalk areas. There are two widths of those painted sidewalk areas along Broadway. There's kind of the narrower painted area in the street that's typically just as wide as a parked car. That's the majority of the street that has the planters in it. And then there are those really extra wide portions, like in front of Grand Central Market or at Ninth, where it's wide enough for tables and chairs. And so, we want to be completely transparent with folks tonight. The trade-off for having that southbound bus lane is the removal of the wider areas, which facilitate the tables and chairs. So we really would like to hear from everybody tonight on that trade-off. It's the trade-off of that space for people on the street versus the speed and reliability benefits for the folks using transit.
Thanks, James. We have a question regarding the historic theaters along Broadway. We know it's a very popular place for these theaters. What considerations have been made to ensure that the historic theaters along Broadway can continue to accommodate production and loading activities, particularly when multiple trucks need to access theater frontages for show or film production load-ins?
Sure. Yeah, so the project really doesn't affect any of the parking on Broadway. We're happy to incorporate loading zones or other needs into the project, but the project is not proposing to remove any of the parking lanes on either side of Broadway. So if you can park along Broadway today, that parking will remain available, except at some locations where we may need to add a left turn lane. But those locations are south of 11th Street. Those locations are not in the historic theater portion of Broadway. So yeah, we've definitely heard from stakeholders about passenger loading. People have to block the traffic lane or double park to get in and out of the car. Trucks have a hard time loading. And I just want to be clear that the proposal for the bus lane is independent of that, because today you can either park at the curb, or if there's no parking available, you end up blocking the traffic lane. And that would remain true with a bus lane. But I think the opportunity that we have, since we're all together and we're focused on how do we fix some of these problems along the Broadway corridor, we can incorporate new loading zones into the project. So those loading zones are available. If we're able to reconfigure Broadway and have that southbound bus lane, we will have the ability to modify those painted areas on the west side of the street, as the businesses and communities see fit. So I think the important takeaway is loading can be made available pretty much in front of any business as part of this project. That's something that we would love to hear from you. If you have a business or of a business that has loading issues, we can work with them to try to address that as part of this project. But the bus lane itself does not preclude anybody's ability to park or load on either side of Broadway.
Thanks, James. I have another question here about bulb outs. Given the value these bulb outs provide as community spaces in area with limited parks, is there an opportunity to make them permanent or expand them rather than remove them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the theme that we've heard, through the engagement that we've done so far and all of the great comments that we're receiving tonight is the value of those painted bulb outs for placemaking, for the community to come together. I saw a comment on the lack of open space in this area. So, I mean, I think, certainly we're very sympathetic to the fact that, this is some of the few open spaces in the area. Um, you know, for our project for a southbound bus lane, the trade-off is those wider painted sidewalk areas. And again, that's why we're here tonight. We want to hear from the community on these trade-offs.
Thanks, James. And Tito, I have a question for you regarding the tap card news. So with tap cards being phased out, what options will be available for riders who do not have access to a debit or credit card?
And I should have clarified this one. Thank you, Laura. Tap cards are not being phased out. We're actually adding more opportunities for people to pay in case they don't have a tap card. So this is if in lieu of folks who are traveling from, other places where they have a different system of tap card, this is a benefit. But also for those people who choose to transition out of tap card, you have more options now. So we're not phasing tap cards out. We're just adding more. We're just adding different ways for people to pay to use the system. So again, tap cards are still here and they will continue to be in use.
Thank you, Tito, for that clarification. Have a good question about just general community outreach. So Giselle, I know you're online, so I'll pass this one along to you. What community outreach was conducted before identifying Broadway as a preferred option? And how was feedback from businesses and residents incorporated into decision-making process?
Yeah, so as part of Ariano Associates, we're part of the outreach consultant team, and we conducted a pre-implementation survey. So we had staff on board buses, and we gathered feedback directly from the riders, and we also have been receiving feedback from residents, businesses, and community members, and it's still currently being reviewed and considered as part of the evaluation process.
Thank you, Giselle.
And Laura, if I can add to that again, if I say in the beginning, I want to reiterate to people again, this is the beginning of the listening of for the project. This is not the end. We're here to hear your thoughts. After tonight's meeting, we're going to continue to be listening and having one-on-ones with folks. So again, please make sure that we are meeting with the appropriate groups. Again, we've been reaching out and meeting with some folks already, but we also have like the next few months to meet with you as well to discuss this. But again, we want to make sure that this is something that it's done with community input and design in the way that we can best deliver it with community suggestions at hand. So again, please share how you think we can best deliver this project or deliver it with your thoughts and opinions. So again, we thank you for being here tonight as well. We have a great amount of folks that have turned out. But again, we could always continue to have this dialogue as we kick off the listening sessions for everybody. So, and we've been hearing you. We see what many of the folks are sharing for as far as input about the alignment. So we're noting that as well and making sure that people are addressing folks as to what their concerns are about this so far. So thank you again.
Thank you, Tito. And we'll make sure to drop in the chat the project email if you're interested in meeting with the team or have any additional questions. Feel free to reach out and we'll make sure to connect you to the right folks. All right. Next question. We have a few questions about safety. How was the decision made to use a shared bus and bike lane rather than a protected bike lane? And what data or safety analysis informed that choice? James?
Sure. So just as a matter of policy, all bus lanes in the city of Los Angeles are shared bus bike lanes unless there is a dedicated bike facility on the same street. So it's just kind of our default. We don't want to criminalize people on bicycles riding, on the right side of the road, which is typically where our bus lanes are. That said, we have had shared bus bike lanes in Los Angeles for quite some time, and we have not had any issues with them. In terms of the question about, why not consider space for a protected bike lane, that really comes down to trade-offs. I think pursuing that as an option would have much more significant trade-offs for the Broadway corridor, namely for loading and parking and other types of operations. So that was not something that we considered. We were really focused on the transit speed and reliability. One of the benefits of the shared bus bike lane is that it is open to people on bicycles. So while it's not a bicycle lane, it is a lane that has less traffic in it.
Thank you, James. Another safety question. Has Metro considered the difficulty of the current design's downtown LA impact on wheelchair access, pickup, and then drop-off locations on Broadway?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'm going to make sure I'm capturing the intent of the question. The project itself, in terms of the bus lanes, is not making changes to the sidewalk or the curb ramps. The RCN bus stop project is making some improvements at some curb ramp locations, just to get people on and off the sidewalk at the crosswalks. But we have heard a lot of feedback around passenger loading and commercial loading. That the dress rehearsal painted sidewalk areas can be a barrier to curb access mid-block. So not at the intersections themselves. And so again, this is an opportunity to revisit the design of the dress rehearsal at certain locations. If there are theaters or businesses that currently have bollards, let's say in front of their frontage, and need a loading zone, that's something that we would like to hear about, because that's something that can be incorporated into the project, to address kind of some of these pain points along the corridor where, we know that people are being dropped off by Ubers and Lyfts all the time here. We know that, that maybe there is a paratransit need for, accessible sidewalk access at this location. And for whatever reason, it's not available today. That's something that can be incorporated into the project. And so we would love to hear from you if there are locations that need further discussion.
Thank you, James. And I do want to clarify, one of the points was the wheelchair accessible vehicle pickup and drop-off locations, if we can maybe address that portion. Yeah.
I mean, if there are locations that there's no sidewalk access today because it's a parking meter and somebody's always parked there, or there are bollards or a planter there and people can't get to the sidewalk. This is an opportunity, since this project will be touching the street in some way. This is an opportunity to make those changes. The philosophy here is, let's put the street back better than it was. It's not just about the bus lane. Metro is happy to incorporate other smaller scale elements, as long as it fits in within the scope of paint and signs and painted curbs, etc. If it's something that's relatively low cost, we're happy to incorporate it into the project.
Thanks, James. We have a question about potential impacts to curbside dining. Will the curbside dining in front of Grand Central Market and in front of 2 Cafe be removed?
So if the proposal for the southbound bus lane moves forward, it would require narrowing of the existing painted sidewalk areas to a dimension that would not support tables and chairs in the roadway. This proposal wouldn't affect anything that's on the sidewalk. So I know that some businesses have outdoor tables and chairs on the sidewalk itself. Those would not be affected with this proposal. But if the tables and chairs are in the street itself, in one of those kind of brown gold painted areas, if the southbound bus lane were to move forward, then the tables and chairs in the street itself would need to be removed.
All right, we have a few questions about traffic congestion. So by removing the driving lanes, it will result in gridlock. Have you considered the drivers who need to use Broadway?
Yes. So as part of, our regular project screening, we do take a high level look at traffic volumes, and LADOT does have thresholds around, um, you know, repurposing traffic lanes and, the amount of delay that would be incurred. And so this project is compliant with those guidelines. But, additionally, Broadway, and especially in this segment, the historic downtown area, it did have 2 lanes in each direction previously, and so it went down to one southbound lane back in 2014, and it's worked reasonably well. And so, the idea is, if it's worked for the last 12 years in that area, then it should work reasonably well for the rest of the corridor. And I think, when folks hear about, well, I'm going to lose a lane of traffic, I think it's very understandable to be very skeptical of how that's going to affect drive time. But I think it's important to remember that there are a number of supporting features along Broadway that are being proposed that are really meant to not cause a lot of delays for people driving along the corridor. The first is that the bus lane itself is a right turn lane. Oftentimes, especially in downtown, there's lots of people crossing the streets. If you're a driver, you're making a right turn. You're often yielding to people in the crosswalk to the right of you. And so, there can be some delays in you making your right turn. That would unfortunately affect the bus lane, but the buses are in that lane today, and they deal with those issues today, and they'll deal with those issues in the future. But for the remaining lane of traffic, there's nobody who's going to be blocking that remaining lane of traffic trying to make a turn. That one lane of traffic is always clear. And so we've found a lot of success, not only through these types of bus lane projects, but, just other lane reconfiguration projects where, lanes are repurposed, but we add dedicated turn lanes. That actually really helps the flow of traffic, because, you don't have to constantly be surprised when somebody's stopping to make a right turn. You're in that one lane goes through, and you leave that lane when you want to make a turn, either right or left. So, the project is trying to kind of, have that fine line between supporting transit, supporting people, moving along the corridor on transit, while not too negatively impacting people who are trying to drive, all the while trying to juggle the open space on the corridor. So it's definitely a challenge, but it's something that we have thought about, and we're confident that we're not going to create a lot of traffic congestion with this proposal.
Thank you, James. Another question for you regarding the analysis conducted to analyze the effects of the priority bus lanes on Broadway businesses, particularly given the economic challenges many businesses already face.
Yeah, so again, the project is not proposing to remove parking, particularly in the segment of 2nd to 11th. Again, some parking may be removed south of 11th to accommodate left turn pockets, but parking would not be removed. There are opportunities to address loading concerns for businesses as a part of this project. The bus lane would not impact, the ability to add a new loading zone or relocate a new loading zone on either side of Broadway. We're hopeful that improving transit will actually improve the number of people along the Broadway corridor. We have almost 60,000 people a day on the lines that are going up and down Broadway. So that's a lot of folks who are going through on the corridor. I think the only remaining aspect is the travel time, which I addressed in the previous question. And I think the largest trade-off that we've been discussing, just based on the comments that we've received, is the modifications to the dress rehearsal itself, and how that could affect businesses. And so I think that that is what we're here tonight to talk with everybody about. We want to get that feedback. So I do want to just reiterate again that the proposal for the southbound bus lane in the segment from 2nd to 11th, really the trade-off is around those wider painted sidewalk areas. That's really the main change. Aside from adding an additional traffic lane, and we've definitely heard from folks that even that it goes against kind of the vision for Broadway, and we understand that, but we're also trying to prioritize all of the folks who are using the corridor every day. So in terms of business, parking is not being changed. We're happy to work with businesses on loading, and we're confident that traffic congestion is not going to create issues for people coming to downtown by car. It's really around the expanded painted sidewalk areas, the tables and chairs in the roadway. But again, we would love to hear from businesses who have concerns. We'd love to work with you to try to incorporate designs into the project that address your concerns.
Thank you, James. We have a question from a resident and business owner who sees Broadway as a destination and gathering place as much as a transportation corridor. Has the project considered opportunities to pedestrianize certain blocks of Broadway or limit through traffic while still meeting transit needs?
Yeah, so I mean, that was an idea that we had discussed early on, was essentially creating a transit mall on Broadway. And for those who don't know what a transit mall is, essentially it closes the street to private automobiles. So you basically restrict it to transit, to delivery trucks, taxis, or whatever the community sees fit in terms of what we're trying to achieve on the corridor. I think that's an interesting idea, and it ultimately went beyond the scope of our quick build project, because closing a street to traffic that really requires a higher level of analysis, circulation, where how do people get around downtown now if Broadway, you can't drive on Broadway. What about access to parking garages that are on Broadway? It becomes much more difficult to do a project of that scale. And again, the purpose of our program really is to deliver quick, low-cost improvements that bring these improvements to transit riders as quickly as possible.
Thank you, James. Okay, let's see. Other questions? So thank you everyone for participating today. Again, if you have any additional questions, you can plug them in the Q&A feature and we will address. Just a reminder, we are trying to group similar topics together to make sure we're getting through all the questions. All right. Question about traffic diversion. Would it be possible to establish something similar where car traffic is diverted to Hill Street with only buses on Broadway?
I think I responded to that in my the last question.
Okay. Thank you, James. Okay. Could the routes be split with southbound buses using Broadway and northbound buses using Spring to minimize impacts on the seating areas along Broadway?
Yeah, so I mean, that's essentially what's out there today, just with the directions switched. Again, southbound service on Broadway splits off at Cesar Chavez and then heads down Spring, down to where it turns into Main at 9th, and it goes down to 11th, hangs a right, and then rejoins Broadway. But northbound service continues on Broadway all the way through the historic theater district. And again, that change was put in place back in 2014 as a result of the dress rehearsal and the single lane in the southbound direction through there, causing issues for the transit travel time.
Thank you, James. And again, thank you for all the participants today. We have quite a bit of questions today, so thank you for your patience as we sort through them and share the answers. Thank you again for participating today. This is the point of the meeting, is really getting feedback. And again, if there is additional information or questions that you have that may not be addressed now or that might come up later, please feel free to reach the project team using the channels that we have been sharing on screen. So we'll pull up that slide in a bit again to remind folks on how to stay connected with the team. But thank you again for participating today. So let's see what other questions we have here. So will the rest of the improvements like increased street trees, street light repair, and sidewalk repair still move forward regardless of bus lane changes?
Yes. So these are two separate projects. So the bus lane component at Metro is a separate project with separate funding than the bus stop improvements. So the bus stop improvements would proceed regardless.
Thank you, James. A question about street allocation. Can you please remove parking or a travel lane on Broadway instead of reducing pedestrian space? We already have so little pedestrian space in downtown LA.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the theme of the trade-offs. It's the additional space for transit, that trade-off with the pedestrianized space. Unfortunately, in order to accommodate the one lane in each direction just for general traffic, and then one bus lane in each direction, that requires a minimum space which exceeds what's available today on Broadway due to those extra wide painted sidewalk areas. So yeah, it's something that we've thought about. It's a topic that we take seriously. I mean, we've definitely heard a lot from the community so far. We're hearing a lot tonight, and we would like to continue to stay engaged and to hear folks' feedback really on the trade-offs here. The trade-off is bringing that southbound bus lane onto Broadway, bringing that southbound service back, really improving the speed and reliability of transit on Broadway, not only from the bus lane, but from the removal of the jogs kind of on and off Broadway that the southbound lines have today, versus what we've heard tonight, the importance of space for people. So I think that's the central theme, and that's what we'd like to hear from you guys on.
Thanks, James. So we have a question about hours. What hours will the lanes be bus only, and will they be enforced? Yeah,
so these are proposed as full-time bus lanes, so they would be enforced at all times. In terms of the automated enforcement, we have a pilot project, the bus lane enforcement program, that has cameras on the buses that capture violations of people parking in a bus lane or parking in a bus zone. And that's a pilot project. We have it on a few of our lines. It is not on Broadway today. It is not part of this project, but I think over time we would be looking to expand bus lane enforcement to all of our bus lane corridors. So I think at some point it could come to Broadway if we have bus lanes on Broadway. But again, that's only for parking violations. It is not for moving violations where a driver is driving in a bus lane. It's only if you park in a bus lane or park in a bus zone that the automated enforcement would kick in.
Thanks, James. Question about businesses applying to be pedestrian friendly, similar to how they can apply for loading. Is that a possibility? Is there an opportunity for business to do that?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if that's a program that the city has. I don't know if Lamise, if you know anything about that.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question one more time?
So can a business apply to be pedestrian friendly, similar to how they can apply for loading?
Not something that I'm familiar with, unfortunately. Yeah, please email us if you want us to look into that further.
All right, we have a question about tap cards. Will there still be commemorative tap cards or will those be phased out with Tap Plus?
As far as I know, we've not. I think the commemorative tap cards have been a hit with many folks, so I have not heard that that's going to be phased out yet. So I would say at this point, no. I say that we will continue to have the commemorative tap cards because they signify, a major, historical event or a metro accomplishment as far as like, opening of a line or something like that. So I would say that we are keeping those the tap cards and commemorative tap cards available.
Thanks, Tito. And can we share a little bit more about the timeline? There is a question about when do we hear about final decisions?
Yeah, for the timeline, I guess this is not the final decision right now. This is the beginning of the whole study and the whole, listening part of this project. So we can go back to the slide that shows the schedule where we have everything. We are here at the beginning, where we've been doing stakeholder briefings and presentations. We have the community meeting. There's an in-person meeting that LADOT will be having as well later next week. So what we're doing is basically listening, taking input, and sharing with community what the proposal is, but also want to hear what your solutions are or what your recommendations are. That this is the time to let us know. We are hearing loud and clear from many people about certain segments as to what you want to preserve. And that's been made very known, and we thank you for that. We also want to hear how we can, work together. If there's a possibility that we can, like James was saying, trade-offs, but how can we actually accommodate one or the other or both if there's an opportunity? So I think that's one of the things. And James, I think I did have a follow-up question just to clarify. Was removing of the parking a possibility in lieu of reducing dress rehearsal? I know that right now dress rehearsal is very important to the local community, but also parking is as well to many of the stakeholders out there, especially the businesses. So, is that one of the trade-offs that is being considered as well? And I guess if you can just clarify a little bit more on that.
Yeah, sure. So unfortunately, removing the parking to accommodate the metro proposal of the four-lane cross section, while preserving those expanded sidewalk tables and chairs area, the painted areas, it's really not possible. There's technically enough width if you remove the parking on the other side of the street, but then you end up with lanes that are going to kind of jog around quite a bit. And that ends up actually removing quite a bit of parking because of the transitions that are required. So it is something that we've looked at, but the trade-offs were pretty substantial with the amount of parking that would have to be removed. There is the concern over just the safety of jogging traffic back and forth. There are concerns with the traffic signal alignment, the costs could escalate very quickly. So yeah, I mean, I think we've taken a very hard look at the corridor. We've really tried to minimize the trade-offs to the extent that is feasible within the scope and the budget of the project. As Tito said, we've definitely heard from a lot of folks in the community. I think we're very sympathetic to what we've heard. I'm on the Broadway corridor quite a bit myself. It's a place that I enjoy going to. I think we hear folks loud and clear. But we're also hearing from folks who are very excited about transit improvements. There's a whole nother stakeholder group of people who rely on transit along the Broadway corridor. And so, as Tito said, we're really reaching out and we're trying to strike that balance. We really would like to work with folks along the corridor to try to understand, what are the needs? Is there a compromise, from all sides that we can make in order to keep what's important on Broadway while trying to accommodate, the speed and reliability benefits that we're proposing for transit. So, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion. But as Tito said, we're very serious about, engaging with folks along the corridor and trying to shape a project that works as best as it can for the majority of folks.
Thank you, James. And I believe there's another question that was asked about will there be other opportunities there? There is an upcoming meeting next week as well. We can go to the following slide to share. LADOT is hosting an in-person community meeting at South Broadway Safety Mobility Project Thursday, June 11th at 6 p.m. at Iglesia Quinonia at 5606 South Broadway, and it's at 6 p.m. And there is contact information as to how to RSVP to go to the event. And there will be information on the projects there as well. So there's multiple opportunities. And again, it doesn't end there either. We're still listening. This is just, like I said, the first step. We want to keep having these discussions with folks. So again, please reach out to us so we can, have these one-offs with you and your groups to discuss and hear from you how we can best work collaboratively on this. We're hearing what you don't like, which is great. Thank you. We also want to hear a suggestion or two as to how we can also maybe accommodate. We're trying to do how we can accommodate both, but that basically happens with reaching out and us having to have that open line of communication with each other. Some people are saying that this is a done deal. It is not. This is again the first step. We're here to listen, and we'll see, we're here to see how we can best design this project while preserving as much of what's there already. So we want to thank you for that too. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Laura. So for a few more questions, I know that we have quite a bit of questions that have been coming in. Again, thank you for your patience. We are going to try to answer as many as possible tonight. But again, we do appreciate you being here and giving us your input for this.
Thank you, Tito. A few questions to wrap this up. Questions about what will happen to parades, protest events, and theater traffics that happen on Broadway. Are there going to be any impacts to that?
Sure, I can answer that. So the closures that take place on Broadway today, we're very familiar with them from a transit operations perspective, and we regularly detour our service around them. That would not change with this project. This project is not a bus rapid transit project. This is not some sort of special transit service that raises the bar on when it can be detoured or not. This is really just a bus lane project meant to improve existing service. And it's really in terms of street closure, special events, film shoots, all of the stuff that happens on Broadway. None of that would be changed as a result of this. The city will still process those permits, and Metro will detour service as needed.
Thank you, James. I do want to take the time to show this slide here about how to stay connected. Like the project team mentioned today is not the last opportunity to share your thoughts about the project and share your feedback and stay engaged with the project. If you have any additional questions or are interested in learning on how to stay engaged, you can check out the information on screen, visit the project website, stay informed through there. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We truly appreciate your feedback in this process. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out through our project channels shown on screen, and we look forward to your continued participation throughout this project. Thank you and have a great evening.